Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time I set up the Battle of Cold Harbor by animating the Battle of Bethesda Church. Now I move right into the fight at Cold Harbor. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, or purchase something from the Teespring store or Etsy shop. Every little bit helps. Thank you. With Union forces moving toward Cold Harbor, the battle lines for the Union Army of the Potomac and the Confederate Army in Northern Virginia began to shift. William Baldy Smith and his 18th Corps and Horatio Wright and his 6th Corps were on the far Union left. Ulysses S. Grant and George Meade wanted to mount an offensive in the Cold Harbor area, so they wanted demonstrations made by the other Corps commanders to distract Lee and maybe relieve pressure that might be coming toward Wright and Smith. Governor K. Warren, commanding the 5th Corps, was ordered to demonstrate in his front, but he was unwilling to do so. So Meade called on Winfield Scott Hancock and the 2nd Corps to push in the enemy pickets. The assault plan for Wright and Smith's troops was scheduled for 6 p.m. on June 1st. Meade placed Wright in charge of the attack, even though Smith outranked him, and Wright didn't have experience in such large operations. 4 infantry divisions would be used to attack the Confederate flank, 20,000 blue-coated soldiers. The Confederates numbered around 10,000, but they were behind breastworks. Prior to the attack, Robert Hoke, fearing for the safety of his right flank, moved Hagood's brigade from the position on his left to his right flank. This was a wise move because the 6th Corps troops overlapped his flank, but he didn't notify any of his superiors about the movement, which resulted in a gap between his division and Kershaw's division. Instead of attacking as one mass, the Union brigades went in piecemeal. The division of David Russell went in first. Part of William Penrose's New Jersey brigade began the assault. The men from New Jersey were decimated by small arms fire and canister when they advanced. They couldn't withstand the shelling for long and fell back to the rear. Penrose wouldn't be outdone and formed up 2 more regiments to feed into the attack. They stepped off into the den of death and became pinned down about 50 yards from the Confederate works. The Union men dug feverishly to pile up any amount of dirt to protect themselves from the projectiles. Next, Nelson Cross's brigade, backed up by 2 regiments of Vermonters from Lewis Grant's brigade, attacked next. Just like Penrose's men, the attack ground to a halt as artillery shells, canister, and musketry ripped holes in their lines. Many of the men retreated in haste, while others attempted to remain on the front and dig small rifle pits to protect themselves. To the north, Emory Upton, the man who broke the Confederate line at the Muleshoe on the Spotsylvania battlefield, was forming his men for his own attack. Remembering how he did so well by stacking his regiments, he made 4 lines of men, about 500 men in each line. The first 3 were made up of the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery. The last line was made up of the rest of his regiments. As soon as they stepped off, flanking fire came in on their left. Hoke's division had cut down trees to funnel the men into a few locations, which allowed them to practice their musketry with devastating results. Upton ordered his men to lay down. Henry Eustis was ill and his brigade wasn't moving to support Upton's attack. Russell, angry at the lack of movement, took charge of the brigade and led it forward. The division commander received a nasty arm wound in the attack, and the rebel resistance proved too much for Eustis's brigade, which fell back to their stepping-off point. William Truex's brigade was the next Union brigade to begin their movement against the Confederate line. Fortunately for them, Hagood's movement created a gap in the Confederate line, and Truex's men occupied the abandoned works and went into the rear of the Confederate line. Wofford's attention was distracted by Benjamin Smith's approaching line, so Truex made it through the lines without much damage. However, once they were behind the Confederate lines, the 8th North Carolina turned to face them and delivered some deadly volleys into their ranks. Truex's men were undeterred by the rifle fire and sent it right back into the Tar Heels. The 8th broke, and the 51st North Carolina, the next ones in line, turned to face the threat. By this time, Truex's men were in disarray, being behind the lines and getting fired at by Thomas Clingman's troops and a few soldiers from William Wofford's brigade. However, the tenacious Upton reformed his ranks and put pressure on Clingman's front, keeping the Confederate brigade commander from dispatching troops to his left. On the Union right, the divisions of Charles Devens and William Brooks of William Baldy Smith's 18th Corps advanced in a more coordinated effort against the Confederate line. The pressure against Wofford, Goodbrine, and Clingman caused the line to collapse as a direct result of the breakthrough where Hoke removed Hagood's brigade. A few rebels fired their weapons as they retreated from their positions, which slowed down the Union troops but didn't stop them. Alfred Colquitt sent the 28th and part of the 23rd and 27th Georgia to hit the Yankees in the left flank, while Joseph Kershaw pulled the 2nd South Carolina and the 3rd South Carolina Battalion from Hennigan's brigade and sent them to hit the blue troops in the right flank. It was getting dark on that June 1st evening, and the darkness, along with the few regiments thrown onto the flanks of the Union soldiers in the breakthrough, caused the blue troops to move back to their original battle lines. Darkness had saved Robert E. Lee's army from disaster. The attacks on the Confederate right looked promising to Grant and Meade, so they wanted to shift more troops into that sector in order to break Lee's lines and have a road all the way to Richmond. Grant pulled the 2nd Corps out of its entrenchments and ordered it to the left of the line. He wanted Winfield Scott Hancock and the 2nd Corps to be ready to support a 6 a.m. assault in that sector by Wright and Smith. Lee saw that Hancock was now gone and pulled part of A.P. Hill's corps away from the left and moved them to the Confederate right, which only left Henry Heath's division of Hill's corps on the left. In addition to Hancock moving to the Union left, Ambrose Burnside and his 9th Corps moved behind Warren's 5th Corps. When Smith informed Grant and Meade that he was in need of ammunition, the 6 a.m. attack was delayed until 5 p.m. on June 2nd, but it would ultimately be delayed again until the morning of June 3rd. While the Union Army was shifting, Lee wanted to take advantage of the situation. He saw an opportunity to deal a blow to Grant when Burnside removed his corps. However, not all of Burnside's corps had gone from the Union right. Lee wanted Jubal Early to fall on the Union right flank and cause as much damage as possible. Early's troops again headed for the area around the Bethesda church, where the division of Thomas Crittenden and Charles Griffin were stationed. Robert Rhodes' division hit the Union brigades first, with 2 brigades from Crittenden's division occupying the Shady Grove Road. The 2 Union brigades attempted to hold out, but for an unknown reason, Joseph Sudsberg's brigade advanced toward the rebel division. The blue-coated soldiers were heavily outnumbered, and the musketry ripped their line to shreds, sending them and Elisha Marshall back toward the church. Henry Heath's division was advancing around the same time as Rhodes was pushing away Sudsberg and Marshall. It was getting late in the evening, and the stiff resistance put up by Simon Griffin's brigade stalled Heath's attack. To the west, John B. Gordon's division overlapped 2 brigades from Griffin's division. Despite the darkness beginning to cover the field, Gordon pressed his men, who sent Griffin's men running toward the Bethesda church. Fortunately for the Union, artillery covered the area around the church and the Tinsley house. In the words of one Union soldier, the whole thing was miserably mismanaged.